Real quick, just one question.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
As far as like expletives, cursing, is that?
Let them fly. We don't
okay.
care.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm always worried. And
Yeah.
and when I say
you're
worried, I
good.
mean genuinely concerned.
Yeah.
So.
Our guest last night, I told him before they asked the question, I'm like, before you ask, you can say whatever you want.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it.
Yeah, usually we're past bestiality at like the 5-minute mark. So.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's a good mark to hit.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. The unburied dead are coming back to life, seeking human victims.
This week on a podcast from Beneath, we have a guest, Ash Hamilton, who was the writer and producer of the beautifully titled The True Tale of Ole Splitfoot versus the Lesbian Warrior Nuns of the Great White North. Ash, how's it going?
That was great, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
You did a great job. I'm here to validate you. You did a great job.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, no problem. It's become kind of our thing on here is to have independent filmmakers, actors, actresses on to, talk, because I've enjoyed independent films for as long as I can remember. And I'm pretty sure Aaron has too. So once we started getting people to come on, I was just like, okay, that's going to be kind of our thing now. Other than just reviewing movies, we were trying to get a lot of guests on. So, I mean, anybody that wants to come on, we enjoy having them on.
Well, I'm going to prove to be as underwhelming as absolutely possible.
Okay, thank you.
See if we can break that. If we can break the trend for you.
There
It's
you
good
go.
to have goals. Very good. No, I mean, I like helping people out. The show, like he said, we just decided, there's a lot of independent stuff that we watched over the time, and we're just, people need to hear, you guys' story, how you got into it, all that stuff.
Well, it is a long and winding road that we will try to traverse.
Well, I'll go ahead and get to the first question, which is what we ask all of our guests. What is your favorite horror movie?
Oh, that's the loaded question, isn't it? Like that's the loaded question.
It is.
So I'll tell you my two most rewatchable horror films, even though they might not fall into the favorite category. That might be easier for me.
Okay.
So as far as rewatchable, I will probably sit through, no matter where it's at, if it's 45 seconds out from the end credits or if it's in like 45 minutes in, I'll watch Evil Dead 2 no matter where I'm at in it. Like if it's on, I'll end up sitting and watching it. And then even though this is, I guess maybe not necessarily classically horror, but I think when I go back and watch it, it still sort of gives me some of those horrific sort of jolts and scares. Is that I will also watch Jaws, no matter where I'm at, where it falls. If I walk into a room and we're 45 minutes into it, I'll watch it. And if we're 45 seconds away from the end, I'll still watch it. So as far as rewatchable goes, Evil Dead 2 and Jaws are my two most probably rewatchable genre films.
Evil Dead 2 is definitely up on high on my list. Now, what makes you think that? What makes you say? Because a lot of people say this whenever I ask that question. They say, "Well, I don't know if it's considered horror," but what makes you think that like Jaws isn't considered horror?
Well, I think people have a problem with Spielberg being attributed to horror, even though, I mean, we all sort of know he had probably a heavier hand in Poltergeist than we were initially led to believe, and that film still has a lot of genuine scares for me. Like I think Poltergeist is still a fantastic horror film, and I will say a tried and true horror film. I think Poltergeist is. I think it's a great film, and I think it has all of those Spielberg signatures. Even though there's been that debate for so long about, who really had more more of a heavier hand behind the camera if it was Spielberg or Hooper. But I think a lot of people don't like to attribute mainstream directors to horror because we hold horror so close to the chest, that if we say, Spielberg directed a horror film and that Jaws is horror, sometimes it's like we lose a piece of the flavor of what it's like to be, rebellious in the horror genre. So I think some people don't like to really say that Jaws is horror. But to me, I mean, Jaws, when I was a child, and probably all the way up until, late adolescence, was a terrifying movie for me. I mean, it has all of those elements that, really prey upon the human psyche. First of all, being an element that you obviously can't control, being in water, which is, to me, sort of horrifying anyways, even though I can swim and I've swam in the ocean, but the idea of being in this body of water that you can't control, this element you can't control, I think is scary. The fact that you are definitely not alone, unless you're in a public pool that you broke into and you're completely by yourself. If you're in a body of water with all these living organisms, you're in an element you can't control with things you can't control that you can't see all of. So ultimately, that scenario is terrifying for me. And then you throw something in there that's hungry, and then it gets really, really horrifying. So for me, Jaws is definitely a horror film. I mean, a kid gets killed in a geyser of blood. I think we all forget that there's a geyser of kid blood in Jaws. It's like, that definitely fills the criteria for you. But I know some people debate if it's actually a tried and true horror film.
I mean, the opening scene, though, with the girl skinny dipping at night, that's just straight horror right there. I mean, that's because you don't see the shark, so it's basically like you could compare it to like a ghost or, something like that. It was kind of, comparable because you just don't know what is going on.
Yeah. And strangely enough, once we start getting past the first film in a lot of successful franchises, a lot of horror films actually follow the Jaws template, which is insert a killer or a killing thing that we can't control and we don't want to confront. And then within that hour and 40 minutes, how do we take our strongest characters and put them up against that thing to see if they'll survive? So we sort of have that Jaws template for a lot of horror films. And strangely enough, a lot of horror films that sort of came before the 70s didn't always have that template. But after Jaws, it seemed that template became a little more mainstay.
All right. He followed that up with E.T., right?
Right. Yeah.
So, I'm assuming that, are you big into, do you like independent horror movies?
Yes, I do. In addition to sort of being in the industry to whatever capacity I'm in it, which you never really know, it's sort of day by day, is that I also I own a entertainment site. I built one called Horror Fix. So, and my primary goal was to keep a website that was independent. A lot of websites, and again, I'm not knocking them because, there are some good, valid news sources out there for horror entertainment, but a lot of these sites, it isn't a guy in their basement. I mean, they're funded, they're getting a lot of money to, not only to sort of, push product, but also to highlight product and highlight certain creators. So I sort of wanted a site that really didn't owe anybody anything, because I always sort of felt like that's when you get some of the best stuff. You find those movies that revitalize your faith in the genre, and almost always those are independent films. It's very rare that I'll come out of a 20, 35, $40 million movie and go, wow, that was inventive, and I can't believe they did that with it. I might think that it's good, and usually when I think that a huge mainstream movie is good, it's because it sort of went against the convention that I already sort of was predisposed to thinking that was going to happen. But the independent films, I mean, God, like every 3 or 4 months, strangely enough, something comes along, and I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Like, it's like, how late to the game am I not writing that movie or not, sort of producing that movie? So independent horror films, to me, sort of represent the true sort of guerrilla filmmaking above and beyond any genre, because, we are sort of like the redheaded stepchild of Hollywood anyways, right?
Right. Now, do you think, I think a lot of people maybe not really confused, but when they hear independent, I think they think B movie, right?
Oh yeah.
And they immediately just think, oh, this is probably going to be trash, which a lot of them aren't. I mean, a lot of independent, even though they're low budget, like you said, I mean, just imaginative and the original. What I'm saying, like a lot of original movies that I've seen out there, like are independent films.
And I think, strangely enough, that might have been something like, let's get very conspiratorial for a moment. Why not? Let's go ahead and start down the rabbit hole.
All right.
That maybe, maybe mainstream cinema and mainstream Hollywood, sort of dug in their claws to that rumor mill and kept it going. That independent meant lesser grade, and it wouldn't surprise me because that's sort of the kind of mentality that you want, right? Is that you want people to think that if you're spending $100 million on something, that it's the highest quality of film, and then anything that's independent or lesser is of a B or C quality grade of story and of acting. And I think, strangely, we end up getting some of the best. We get some of the best performances. We get some of the best efforts from crew. Independent films, when people have their heart in it, I mean, you can smell it as soon as that movie starts, that these are people with passion. This wasn't something that was just put into the the Hollywood meat grinder. We saw what came out of it, and hopefully all the elements fit and it was still edible. With independent cinema, we have to be a little more mindful of it, and usually those elements we put into it are more often than not a little more thought out.
Well, what do you like? What's some of your favorite independent horror movies?
There's some of the ones that, strangely enough, like hardly anybody has seen, and I always push them. Like, I'm always like, oh my, if you've got 2 hours of your life, like, this is what you really need to take a look at. If you haven't seen a dark song, like a dark song genuinely impressed me. And that, even though it was independent, was still picked up by IFC Midnight. So, it was definitely an independent film, but then it got some decent distribution. Dark Song, I thought, was an excellent movie. Very unpredictable, and it was full of emotion. Some fantastic performances in that movie, and it was a horror film, but it was a horror film with a lot of emotional resonance, which sometimes is really hard to come by. I was really surprised by that. And then I was also surprised by a movie by Mark Fredo called Hellfire. If you haven't seen it, Hellfire is really good. And it definitely shows Mark is a great film. And I've talked to Mark, especially after I saw the film. I sort of sought him out and wanted to do an interview with him because I was so impressed by it. That I thought that was great. And then some of the ones that are, I guess still independent, but are definitely on the radar. Some of the sort of out there stuff, I guess we could still consider it independent, but I was impressed by films like Mandy, because of the art direction and the fact that they were able to take a film and put it in this weird sort of world. And it's strange because for a movie like that, that's sort of like hyper violent in places, and it's sort of like this drug addled romp through this fever dream. I sort of look at movies like Ridley Scott's Legend, and I'm like, if we had this weird horror equivalent of Ridley Scott's Legend, it would be Mandy with Nick Cage in it. It's like all we were missing was that Tangerine Dream soundtrack, and we could have had our horror legend. But I like movies that understand that horror can also be fantasy. We don't have to always play by the rules. I think often we limit ourselves when we start looking at story and we start looking at narrative, because we've got all of these films that have formed a baseline for us. This is what haunted houses are. This is what emotional trauma is. This is the limits to human endurance. Like, we have all of these, these bars that have been set for us. And as filmmakers, I think, unfortunately, we spend so much time trying to navigate between these things that we don't really tell the stories that we really want to tell, because we're sort of chained by what all these movies have done before us. And I liked films like Mandy, for example, because as you're watching it, there's not a lot of restraint there. It's sort of filmmaking without restraint, where I don't really see any point where they said, "Hey, should we try this?" And then everyone sort of unanimously said no. Like, I think they just said, "Hey, we should try this," and then the next thing you knew it was on film.
Right.
So movies like that definitely, I think interest me to the point where I just can't sort of get past my love for indie film, just because of those barriers. They have those barriers set, and I think they're really content breaking them, because if you're self-funding or you're private funding to an extent, you're crowdfunding, or however you're getting, you're getting your film paid and made, it's like you might as well sort of forget the glass ceiling and just keep on shooting up there to see how far you can get. And I think a lot of filmmakers do that. And
Yeah, a lot of some of the most recent like independent horror that I've been like truly impressed with. You may have seen there's a movie called Harvest Lake by
yeah,
Brian Williams. That movie and his Plank Face, like
yeah.
those movies were like, because I went into them just thinking, they're probably going to be like these campy throwback movies, but they're not. I mean, they were just like, that was like some of the most like original stuff I'd seen in a while, coming from just independent.
And I also like some stuff I like stuff that's really, really sort of bizarre, open-ended horror that doesn't necessarily do what you think a horror film is supposed to do. And that sort of includes some weird little films, and some films that people still don't sort of realize are out there. But films like Lake Mungo, for example, was an interesting film for me, and that was sort of one of the first small sort of mockumentary films that came out that I thought was extremely effective. Same as a film called Lovely Molly, I thought was an interesting little film. And these are definitely more polished films than I think what people expect from indie fare. But God, there's something about films that sort of get under your skin, and that's a hard thing to do in horror. Like with horror, because there's so much, I mean, if somebody has like $35 in a dream, usually they're making a horror film. They're not going to make a film about the Pacific Theater
Yeah.
huge naval battles. It's like they're like, let's make a horror film because I got a little bit of money and I got an iPhone. So we all sort of make these horror films so the market gets real glutted. So we sort of have these ideas of what horror films are, and then you'll have one that comes just out of sort of left field, and it's just sort of like, I guess the only way I can really describe it is a sort of icky. It's not like
Yeah.
gross. It's just sticks with you, and you're not really for sure why. Films like, I think the Taking of Deborah Logan is one of those films for me, where they took a concept of illness, which is always sort of strange, especially people who have been around illness a lot. People who have had relatives that have been in hospice for, because that's the weird thing that they don't really tell you about hospice is, you think the hospice is like a week. It's like,
Yeah.
as you get older, you think like by the time somebody gets to hospice, that's it. Like it's going to be a few days, and then the whole experience is going to be over, and you're going to grieve. But it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes the end almost takes longer than the beginning. I know that seems sort of cryptic, but like that's how it is sometimes with these wacky illnesses that we don't really know how to treat. And we find ourselves in really dark places with these people because we're confronting death day after day after day with them. Like we're sort of on this weird journey with them, and even though they're going to end the journey, at least most times before we do, it's like we're right there. We're right there in the sidecar. And movies that can sort of give you that feeling, like I think Taking of Deborah Logan is pretty rare. But speaking from someone who's had to deal with relatives that had Alzheimer's, it's like that movie captured that weird element of the fact that disease is scary, and chronic illness and things that we can't treat, and seeing someone's personality start to like ebb away is extremely scary. I mean, that's a horrifying thing to see someone that you've known all your life, and then all of a sudden actually see them before your own eyes become someone else, and something else. Like that's horrifying.
All right. So how did you get involved in like movie making, producing, writing?
So So strangely enough, even though I am in Illinois now, I spent about 12 years on the East Coast. So I was a New Yorker for quite a while. And when I was out there, I did a lot of work in web and online marketing. And I did some design work. And even previous to that, I was an illustrator for years. So I was a fine artist, and then moved my way into digital art because, quite frankly, like, that's how you made a living. After you become a fine artist, you sort of have to do something else. And I just started to get into video out of necessity because, strangely enough, that was usually the component that either nobody knew how to do, or it was so expensive for young businesses, for small businesses to shoot and produce, that if you knew how to do it, you were in pretty high demand. So I started out shooting tons of corporate video, actually, was what I ended up shooting, which was a lot of marketing videos, a lot of web videos, a lot of like corporate culture videos.
Did you film the horrible training videos that we may watch at some of these?
I may have had a hand in, yes, the most frightening of films, the training videos. So I just sort of learned how to pace a narrative that really isn't sort of linear. Like when you look at like training videos and stuff, you're like, first of all, as soon as you start watching it, it's just an endurance test. Like, how in the world do we get through these things? Like, I'd rather be doing anything else. So you've got to try to look at timing. You got to try to look at pacing. You just got to try to get people through it. So I started doing all these sort of real boring videos, and videos with a lot of people who think that they look really smart with a sweater and a blazer. So we did a lot of sweater blazer videos, corporate culture, like, this is who we are. This is what we do. It's like, but my employees still hate me and I don't know why. Well, because it's all sort of bullshit. So I did that for years. And strangely enough, after 9/11, I partnered with a couple of people from the New York Fire Department, and they started to create evacuation procedure plans. That was a big thing after 9/11, was evacuation procedure plans. And these evacuation procedure plans often needed videos. So any building, in the 5 boroughs over, I think it was 6 stories tall, you had to do these procedure plans and videos. So we were contracted to go in, and it was like a big deal. Like, we had like 2 units, and we'd have to film the ingress and egress so that they could see, how people were going up and down floors, how quickly they were able to do it. And we ended up going to the AIG building, which is a really, really thick, it's 67 floors up. And they never allow anybody on the observation deck. And by the way, it's absolutely gorgeous up there. It's all of this, like, it's like a zodiac. The floor is totally like the houses of the zodiac done in this like mosaic, this tile mosaic. And it had the brass globe in the center. It's like if you saw a room that instantly made you think of rape charges, it was like, it's like there's probably a million secrets between the 20s through the 40s in that room. It's like a horrible thing to make light of, but it's like as soon as you walk to the room, you're like, oh, bad things have happened in here, with a lot of really expensive cigars. So you go up there, and we started shooting, and I was always a huge fan of film, and specifically horror film. It was just always compulsory for me. I just always loved horror film. And that was one of those weird instances where I was like, why aren't I actually making like short films or something? Because I'm here, there's cameras everywhere. Like I know tons of people in the tri-state area with equipment, and I could probably make things sort of on the fly and cheap. And and then I got paid, and that feeling was gone for a little while, because it was just like, I can't do that, And then like years later, I was doing more video and web work and stuff. And that was when it just sort of started to fit, because at that point, I think 2011 was when I started the Horror Fix website, and the channel was there. Like the ability to push stuff and the ability to promote stuff became easier, because I sort of had this built-in platform. And that was when I started thinking, this is organic. Let's start doing some short films, and let's start writing some stuff and see what happens and see where it goes. it was always sort of my goal. You know, I mean, people who love movies, there's always a bug somewhere in the back of your head that's like, I want to make movies. I love movies. I want to make movies. And sometimes you make something, you look at it, you go, maybe I'll take an accounting course now because it didn't quite work out. And there are other times where you're like, hey, that wasn't shit. Like, that wasn't like the steaming pile of shit that I thought it was going to be. And I saved it in editing, and it's like, I could do another one of those. And then you do another one.
Nice. Yeah, I've kind of
That's the very unromantic. That was the very unromantic. Like, I woke up and I had this fantastic idea. It's like, no, I was shooting corporate videos.
Yeah.
It was fucking soul crushing. And then I woke up and I was like, I don't have any bourbon left. And then that was sort of how that happened.
Yeah, I've always wanted to also get into like filmmaking. I never did, and I don't know why, but I think it was just not having that group of people around me that also want to do it. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like, well, I can't film and act in it and direct it all, by myself. So I think that was just it. That community, not having that around, is the only thing holding me back.
No, that's difficult. It really is. I mean, especially because the idea of taking something from, inception to ultimately its conclusion and distributing it, thinking of doing that all on you is, man, that's overwhelming. That's an overwhelming idea. I mean, that's an ulcer right there.
Oh, yeah.
Just trying to figure out how to do that, and oftentimes it really is the people who end up finding that support system. I think that more often than not are able to sort of push forward.
All right. So who would you say is your favorite director? Or is there a director that you like? I don't want to say idolize, but maybe when you thought about directing, that's kind of who you thought of, like, I want to try to be like them. Maybe not like be like them, but.
So this is probably where I'm going to lose my horror movie card.
Okay.
So my laminated union card is going to get cut in half. So somebody's going to knock on my door by 2:00 in the morning, and I'm going to get hazed. But I'm a huge fan of Fritz Lang, who directed the silent film Metropolis, and who also directed M with Peter Lorre in it. And those movies too, specifically, in fact, Metropolis actually being my favorite movie of all time, not the most rewatchable, right. but my favorite movie. Like I am still, whenever I watch that, I sit there half the time and I'm just shaking my head, like, how in the world did this guy do this?
What year did that come out? 20 something?
Yeah, it was. I believe Metropolis was actually 1918.
18. Okay, yeah.
And then we have Nosferatu, which was 22.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that we lost 45 minutes of Metropolis for almost 100 years, yeah. And then we finally found it, which was absolutely insane. And then we were able to find like 45 minutes of a movie that we never thought we'd ever see. So maybe there's still hope for movies like London After Midnight. Maybe they are still out there somewhere. That's like the Ark of the Covenant of like horror films. Is one day you're gonna walk into like a public bathroom and you're gonna see like toilet paper stacked on some film cans, and you're gonna be like, oh, let me just check, and then what the fuck is The Hypnotist?
Yeah.
And then you take it home and it's London After Midnight. But like I love old films. And I love old horror films and old genre films specifically because they weren't really trying to break a mold or create a mold. It was just this thing. It was this amorphic idea that they had, and they were just trying to wrangle it and fit it into 2 hours or less than 2 hours, depending. So you end up getting some fantastic films like Metropolis, and then later on, I think it was 1956. We want to fast forward a ways to like Dana Andrews and Curse of the Demon, which I think is a fantastic horror film that few people are aware of, because the further distance we get away from films like that, the less we sort of acknowledge and recognize that they still exist. But yeah, I look at Fritz Lang and what he was capable of doing. They say that if he would have tried to have made that movie, even in like the late 90s, early 2000s, like, it would have been projected $200 million, $300 million movie. It's insane. It's super ambitious. It's like basically going, hey, we've never made Jell-O before, and then someone goes, what we should do? We should make a fucking city out of it. It's like there was no, There was no in between. It was just like, so Jello, that's pretty cool. And then it's like, we're gonna live in a Jello house. It's like there was no ramp up. There was no like B, through Y. It was just like, here we are. We're gonna make this thing. It's gonna be absolutely crazy. And then before you know it, you've got this fantastic movie, Metropolis, that literally still puts me through all the emotions, no matter how many times I've seen it. Like, I'm sitting there going, it's like, oh, if they would just find someone who'd be their champion. Like, I still get like emotionally shook up over that film. So when I look at movies, I always look at the fact that we've got so much going for us now. We've got years, we've got decades, and at this point of the century of filmmaking that we can look back on and go, okay, I want to do this like this, or I want to do this better than this, or I want to try to emulate this, and this guy did this and it's really cool. But like Fritz Lang was just like, I don't know, let's just make this crazy ass huge fucking thing, and maybe I don't know how to do it, and I'm gonna get tons of people to do it, and they're all gonna get here on the same day, and we're gonna get crazy with this. It was like the perfect storm. It's just like I'm enamored with the idea that movie exists. Like every time I watch it, I just keep thinking to myself, like, I can't believe that I'm seeing this. I can't believe that this is a real thing. Like it's a tangible movie that you can go out and buy. Like it still sort of bewilders me that it exists. Yeah. So everything I look at, I sort of look at like, shit, there wasn't even any audio. Like they were using color plates, for day and night. They had an orchestra. Yeah. It was like, who probably never played the damn thing twice the same way. And it was just absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. And here we are, 100 years later, and we're trying. So the fact that was done then, I guess everything I look at is sort of like, man, if I could just chip off a little bitty edge of that, I'd be happy.
All right. I see that Aaron's back. Aaron, can you hear us now?
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to chime in there, because you've been quiet there for a while.
And the video looks really good too. Your video looks nice.
Looks a lot better
because it's off my Google phone. Yeah, I have a better. That's weird. My phone has a better camera than I have for my computer. No, I missed out on a little bit because of technical difficulty. So I don't want to ask any question that's already been asked. I was going to say what Carrie was saying with the independent, and they think it's B movie and everything. But I mean, just looking at the title of your movie and how you have it displayed, it reminds me of the Grindhouse era. And I think that's what we all like. We like those old, they might be cheesy, but they hold a special place in our heart, and I see that right now, that's kind of like a trend where everybody's making a slasher, or they make something that, is based in 1980 or 1970. And I love it. I'm all over that.
I think we also approached it when we were writing it, that the main thing that I wanted to stick with was the comedy. Like that was a huge thing for me. Specifically because, I actually love horror comedies from the 80s and even the early 90s. I think a lot of them are still very, very underappreciated. I think there were so many of them at one point that horror fans started to become very hypercritical of them because they were leaning too far on the comedy, and they feel that they weren't able to supply the gore or the scares or whatever. But I love this idea of something absolutely horrible happening, like horrible. And I mean, and I go back to like, Dan O'Bannon, Return of the Living Dead, which I think is probably one of the best horror scripts that was probably ever written as far as horror comedies go. I mean, Return of the Living Dead is just, man, it's pitch perfect. Like the beats of that film, I mean, you know exactly when you're supposed to laugh, and you know exactly when you're supposed to be horrified, and it fits in there so well. Plus, Dan O'Bannon was a fantastic writer. So what we were trying to do is we were trying to take a look at the fact that, as humans, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but we're fucking horrible. I mean, like the human creature, we're just like the worst, right?
Yeah.
Like, the earth and everything around us is just like, when are they going to do something useful? Like they're all sort of just looking at us like, even like cats are like, Jesus Christ, really? Like this guy, he's in the door, then he's out the door, then he's in the door. Now he's supposed to stay inside. He doesn't want to be inside, but now that he can go outside, he wants to stay in. You know, it's like we're like worse than the animals. And I thought, you know, even if something horrible was happening, like right beside you, we would find a way to complain about it. Like we would find a way to bicker. And sort of that to me is like, I have to find that funny so that we don't go crazy and we don't, you know, like hate our fellow man. Like we can still love our fellow man by looking at the dumb shit that we do and just go, oh my God, that's ridiculous, and laugh at it. Even though we know it's horrible, like we know it's deplorable, though. It's absolutely deplorable. But if we can do that, like it helps. Like it helps with our own condition because we know that we're also horrible. So if we can sort of laugh at those horrible things, and I thought, you know, it wouldn't matter. Like, and this is years ago, like years and years ago. I don't know if I want to say unfortunate or fortunate enough. Like I dated some women who were in the erotic dancing arena.
There you go.
And it was like, and it's like it's a mess, by the way. Like it's a complete mess. Like that world is a complete mess. Like you step inside it and you're like, this is why. Yeah, this is why the allure is very skin deep.
It's better to be the guy going in the club and then you get to leave. That's it.
It's a fine membrane of glitter, and then when you punch through the glitter, you're like, oh, this is shit. This is shit. This smells. This is horrible. So you punch through the membrane, and then it's all horrible. And sort of just looking back when I was younger and stuff, and some of these weird instances of, you know, friends who were also like bouncers at some of these clubs, and just, you know, spending a little bit of time with them, you know, and hearing their stories and everything. It was like, yeah, like this is just a train wreck. Like it's whole, like, industry is a dumpster fire. And to have people in that industry who unfortunately are sort of like the last defense against the apocalypse, I'm like, that's how it would go down. That's how it would go down, because that's the bullshit that happens on Earth. You know, other planets are like, no, man, we took care of it. But Earth is just like, no, it was like, you know, we found out there was a devil, and a lot of us didn't even believe in it, which was fucked up. And then it happened at a strip club, which was even worse. And it was in rural Canada. So there was like nobody there. It's like, that was sort of like how I wanted to approach this, was just like, the end of the world doesn't always have to happen with like Green Berets. You know, it doesn't always have to be like, I think we can stop the meteor. If I go onto the meteor and I fuck it into submission, it's going to break it into 1,000 parts because I've got a Navy SEAL dick or what. You know, it's just these weird things that these guys do in action movies, you know, and it's always a guy, he just happens to be there too, where it's like, listen, I know that we're just a bunch of scientists, just macro and microbiologists, and we can't do anything. But I saw a guy go into the bathroom with a beret on. Does that mean anything? He looked troubled. And then he comes out and, you know, he's got to do a lot to save his daughter or something. You know, it's hyper convenient is what all these movies are. But if the end of the world ever like truly happened, it'd be a complete shit show. You know, it would be like, I don't know, it would happen like, you know, during somebody's break at like a Dollar General or something. Like, this is actually the real world, you know, is like, that's how stuff happens. You know, stuff doesn't always happen out of convenience. I mean, which is why we see, you know, our government can't take care of anything, because it doesn't happen. All of their contingency plans don't mean anything, you know, because you have to have everything accounted for. So the comedy for me is how do we take that? How do we take what could be a huge budget movie? You know, like the end of the world is supposed to, you think of like, you know, Roland Emmerich and shit, you know, you're always thinking of like, well, you know, we got to have a server farm just to populate you know, all the polygons for our 3D rendering for our end of the world. And it's like, well, what happens if maybe you only have like $100,000 to make 2012? Like, how would you make that movie? And instantly I'd be like, well, I'm not going to have any of those special effects, because then I wouldn't be able to hire any actors. And then you start thinking, it's like, well, okay, if I had to do it over a weekend, how would I do it? If I had 48 hours to make this movie and I was just like paying people in cigarettes, how would I make this movie? And then I was like, I'd probably put strippers in it. I'd probably put a lot of strippers in it, and I'd have them actually be lesbians, warrior nuns who were undercover at a strip club, and they fight the devil. You know, like that's my weird fever dream. And then somebody was actually like, man, that sounds like fun. I'm like, really? Okay.
That
Maybe we should
speaks.
write it.
That speaks to me. Yeah.
And that's actually like what the movie is. We're lucky that the title of the movie is also the synopsis. You know, so like when people are like, so what it's about? I'm like, well, it's that. It's the
Yeah.
Warrior
Read the
Nuns
title. That's what
versus
it is.
this devil guy. Like that's how they do it.
Yeah,
But
the first time I seen the title, I was like, I don't even need a trailer. I'm already sold.
Yeah.
Because I knew what I was getting. I knew what I was going to be getting
like
just by the title.
I couldn't believe, first of all, that because this is so things got real crazy really quickly. Just to let you know. So I actually I'm like really just throwing the skeletons out of my closet here. So the actual like genesis for the movie was that my wife and I were invited to this Irish folk band at a Catholic church, right? And my family's Catholic, so like I'm already damned in that sense anyways. It doesn't matter. Like I can't do anything to top it off. You know, they're just like, no, you're the worst. And we went there, and by the way, like, are either of you Catholic?
No.
Okay. So like with most religions, the lure is like, hey, listen, you should show up at 7 because we've got bingo and you could win a 32-inch low definition television set. You know, it's like there's bad prizes and then you go and you try to win it. But like with Catholicism, the lure is always alcohol, always. Like we just throw it in your face. And it's like, hey, you know, you should show up at 7 o'clock. And I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing. It's like, it's an open bar. And then everybody shows up and they just usher them in. So, and that was sort of like, you know, we were like, well, you know, it's an Irish folk band. Like, you know, I'm pasty and Irish, and maybe I'll go, you know, a couple of Yule or whatever, you know, Irish people say when they hear good music, and like, I'll, you know, do this thing. And like, there was a lot of alcohol. There was a lot of alcohol. So we're like drinking wine, just drinking more wine and drinking more wine. And then I was like, man, I can't believe like how I've inadvertently worked for the Catholic Church for this long. Like I've always wanted, I was a high school teacher for a Catholic church for years. So I taught high school at a Catholic church. And then I wound up teaching college for a Catholic organization. And then I wound up actually teaching software, like IT stuff, and doing video stuff for another Catholic organization. And I was like, man, it's like, you know, the fingers of the Catholic Church are so like far reaching, you know, it's like, I just can't get away from it. And then, you know, I was like, you know, but you know, I never hear about like Canadian Catholic churches. I'm like, you just never really hear like there's a sect of the, you know, Canadian Catholic Church that is just, you know, like they have weird practices or something, you know, there's strangely enough, there's like, I think, geez, I can't think of it, but it's in Africa. There is a weird offshoot of Judaism in Africa that still actually sacrifices animals. So like there's these weird offshoots, right? It's like then they're still there. There are these like weird offshoots of, you know, Judaism and Catholicism stuff everywhere. And I'm like, but we just don't hear anything, you know, from like, you know, Canada. And I thought, you know, maybe it's just because they didn't really have the hang of it. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if they had like this Canadian seer or this like, you know, a saint that was, you know, like a prophet, and what if he just got everything wrong? Or like he came close to it, you know? And so basically the gist of the story is that this weird Canadian offshoot of the Catholic Church has this guy that they think is predicting the end of the world. And he tells them that it's going to happen at this strip club called the Beaver Dam. So there's this secret order of warrior nuns, and they send like 2 of their operatives there 7 years too early. So they've infiltrated a strip club, a very rural, low-rent strip club, and they've been there for 7 years.
Oh man!
And they're extremely cynical and extremely jaded, and they've all got really bad cocaine habits, and like they're sort of more now of the personalities that they are pretending to be than who they like really are. So the movie actually takes place on the night where, strangely enough, that it actually happens. They're there. They're doing their job at the Beaver Dam, Canada's premier rural gentlemen's club, and the woman carrying the Antichrist sort of strolls in, and then they gotta do their business. So,
Now, are you gonna
epic classic strip of good versus evil in a strip bar?
Is this gonna be filmed in Canada or
No, not even filmed in Canada. And I'm sure we're probably going to end up like catching like a sign that has like 55 mph on it. People are going to be like, that ain't in fucking Canada. Look at their blatant disregard for the metric system. Yeah, so we'll end up doing something that'll just blatantly tell people we're definitely not filming in Canada. But if you've ever been in Illinois, like during the fall, it gets very gray. Like it sort of like mimics some of the more rural parts of Canada. Like the two terrains are fairly similar.
right?
So luckily, we've got some vast expanses where there's not a whole lot going on. So we can sort of double for Canada. But yeah, we'll be in a rural part of Illinois.
You've got you got some pretty good actors and actresses in this that you've already got landed already. How did you get those?
This is sort of the weirdness, like the weirdness of what we were trying to do versus what ended up happening. So here's our Cinderella story, and not like what was the Cinderella boxing story. It's like this one has a much happier ending. Like no one gets brain damage. So at least not yet. I mean,
Yeah.
This production is still young. We'll see. So I was writing this movie, and there was a guy who was another writer who I knew, who had produced a couple of horror shorts locally, and I had talked to him because he was a big horror fan, and I was a big horror fan, and people were like, people like set you up with friends. It's like a blind friendship,
Right.
They're like, you guys should talk, and then like 15 minutes, you're like, are you trying to get me to fuck this guy? It's like you start walking a razor's edge, like, and what am I supposed to do here? It's like, we supposed to have dinner. So we became friends, and I said, hey, listen, I've got this idea that is, I'm not even going to say it's a good idea. Like, I've got this idea about these lesbian warrior nuns, and they need to fight the devil. And he was like, do you think we could both write this movie? And I was like, I think anyone could conceptually write this movie. Like, I don't think it's like just you and I have what it takes. Like, I think that it could be a movie that could be written by multiple people, but let's like take a crack at it. And I said, listen, I've got all these notes and I've got all these scenes and everything. And I said, what if I, gave you what I've got, and then what if you primarily like wrote the script, because he's a great writer and he's a lot faster than I am. Like I'll get hung up on dialogue, and I'll have like 10 different lines of dialogue for one very small piece, and then I just sort of flip flop and I waver between all 10, and where he's very restrained, like he's able to go, no, this is what we need, and here's how this works. So we got a script that we really liked. Like we were looking at it and going, wow, this is actually like a movie. It's like, that's when you're impressed with yourself. It's like the little congratulatory praise you give, like, this is a movie that we've got here. So it's not like a really long commercial. This is like a movie. So we had the script, and a friend of mine is this guy, Max Cherokee. So Max has done some films for like Universal and Lionsgate and everything. And he's been, directing movies for like about 26 years. So he got tons of movies under his belt. And I had done some promotional work for Max for a movie called Mayday, which was like Evil on a Plane with Michael Pare in it. And so we were all, this was during the first few days of the burgeoning corona apocalypse, when we were all sort of home, and I said, hey, Max, I know you probably, we're probably busy, but hey, listen, I got the script. Like, you want to like just take a look at it and tell me like how shitty it is, like where it falls on the sliding scale of shitty movie. And and Max has no filter, by the way. Like, if you go on my site and you like Google his name, like CERCHI, like, and you find an interview, he has absolutely no filter. Like his review for Hereditary that we were talking about was quite simply, it's like Rosemary's Baby with the girl ain't got no head. Like that's basically. So it's like I knew that he wasn't going to pull any punches. He wasn't going to be like, oh, this is great. He'd probably be like, it's how's that accounting course coming? Like, so I gave it to him, and he was like, do you have anybody attached to this? Anybody you're thinking of? And I said, I got to be honest with you. We just sort of gave birth to this thing in the last couple of weeks, and we're still looking at what we want to do with it, and we're not for sure if we're going to try to do it regionally and raise a little bit of money or what. And Max was like, hey, let me read all of it, and I think maybe I want to direct this movie. And I was like, oh, well, that's an interesting development, because I was really just wanting an opinion, but that's fantastic. So, and Max comes back and he's like, hey, listen, I think I want to direct this movie. And I think we should talk to Michael Pare and Robert Lasardo and get them on this like as soon as possible. And I was like, the actors, those guys that act in movies. So at this point, I'm just looking at how we can raise like $25,000 to make this movie. It's the main thing for me. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, and I think that we could probably go ahead and like secure distribution for this thing pretty quickly. So I'm like, I should probably call the other guy, because he needs to know, how this movie's getting made since his name is on it. And, we started to have more conversations about it and more conversations about it. And both Prey and Lasardo really, really enjoyed it. Lasardo, by the way, he was a really great guy and a very classically trained actor, even though he's extremely intimidating. And he was like, this is like really funny, but like smart funny for a movie about lesbian warrior nuns. and I'm like, I don't know how much of a compliment that is, but I'm gonna take it at an 8. So I'm gonna take it as a good compliment. And then it was, okay, so who else do we want, and how are we gonna do this? And it was a sort of a crash course for me, because a lot of my filmmaking and doing shorts before, or setting up shorts, or producing, I had produced a feature or comedy before that, and I had written, produced, and directed 2 shorts, and then I had served as a producer on another short, all in a very small amount of time, by the way. So this is all relatively new. So when this happened, I was like, okay, this is, it's still sort of in my wheelhouse, but this experience is becoming bigger. So how do I sort of, rein that in and make that work? So before we knew it, we had Robert Lasardo, Michael Pare. We had Kaylee Williams, who's been in 63 horror films, which is crazy because she's still like this tiny little young thing. And it's like, I'm like, you've been in 60, you have been in 63 films. We have Jean Young, who was a great, done a lot of television. She's great. We have Max Cook, who is actually the voice of Chester Cheetah, strangely enough, who's playing this character Randy, who is hilarious. Like, he's a hilarious guy anyways, but the character hopefully is going to be just as hilarious as Max is. We have Julianne Prescott, who is just great and has been in tons of horror films as well. And we have a regional actress who, strangely enough, is just like, she just is so great. Like everything she does, like, we absolutely had to include her. And when we had first thought of this as being a really, really small movie, like, she's on a lot of our marketing collateral. Like, she's on a lot of our posters, and she's done a lot of modeling for us when we first just started to get the idea out there. And we thought that we might, try to pitch the idea around. It's like we wanted to have some visuals for her. So she's on a lot of the collateral already, which is great. And then we've got, like, can you edit this?
Yeah.
Like, can you edit this part out?
Yeah, I can.
What I'm about ready to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you can edit this out, and I would really appreciate it if you did.
Yeah, well.
So within the next few days, like, Bai Ling, who was in Sky Captain, Crank, So we have not actually announced her, but she's attached to it now.
Oh,
Cool.
wow. That's very awesome.
And we've been talking to, like, strangely enough, we're one of the few films that we actually have the support of Ron Jeremy already. Like, if you look at our videos, we have an endorsement video from Ron Jeremy, which is ridiculous. But
Yeah, I saw
we've been talking to Ron about a larger role. So that might drop with them.
And when you say larger role,
right, yeah, we just mean a side profile.
Oh, okay.
He just turns and then turns back. So we've been like really, really lucky, extremely lucky that people who, you know, have, I don't want to say that, you know, that people who haven't been in that many movies don't have careers. They have careers they have to watch out for, they have to maintain, and there's a reputation there. But some people who have been in the industry for a long time, you know, really have to manage reputation maybe a little more stringently and tighter, and to have them attached to a movie that sounds this crazy really came as like a shock to us. That they were like, no, this is actually a smart script. And I'm like, it is? Oh, it is. Totally
Yeah, I
is.
meant to do that.
That's really smart. But yeah, so that part, yeah, if we could edit that part out, that'd be great.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
I've
for sure.
Yeah. But that was just like, that was pretty awesome that happened. And that and
Oh, awesome.
Bailing just happened like 2 days ago. So we had approached her a while ago and just couldn't nail anything down, which happens.
Yeah.
And then finally, you know, she had a chance to read the script and really liked it and all that. So I'll tell you a funny story. And this is something that you guys can keep.
Okay.
Okay.
So Damien Maffei from Strangers Pray at Night and from Haunt and like a million other things. Like Damien is a great guy. And I've known Damien for years. And I had like given Damien the script at one point in time because I had a couple characters that I thought he would be really good for. And Damien is super busy, like not just with being like Damien, but is like his wife is also a nurse. And like, you know, during this time right now, he's been extremely busy. And I was talking to Felissa on the phone and she was like, you should talk to Damien about this movie. And I said, I've given him the script and Damien's really busy. She's like, he hasn't got back to you. And I'm like, no. And then I got real cocky and I'm like, you should tell him to call me. I'm like, now it's on you. Like you've watched that videotape and you've got 7 days to get Damien Maffei to call me. So what was funny is like I knew like this guy is so like busy. And within like an hour of getting off the phone with Felissa, like I get a text from Damien. I haven't been dodging you. And I'm like, I know. So like she's nice that she can get anybody to call anybody else. Like anybody. Like she can get anyone to call anyone else. And then I'm like, man, I really should have pulled out a blue chip or something. You know who should have called me for this was Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
He hasn't called me back at all. And like 45 minutes later, I don't know who you are, but this is Brad Pitt. Sorry, I overstepped usually. Yeah. She's like, she's that kind of lovable that like people will call you back if she tells them to call you back.
Nice.
So that's something to keep in mind.
I was looking through because you're on Indiegogo, right? Is that what I'm looking at? Yeah, Indiegogo.
Yes, yeah.
You have a lot of like really good like merch on here for the
Yes.
for the I keep calling them prizes. It's not really a prize, you're paying for it. But I do have a question about one of them.
Okay.
Spider nipple.
Okay.
Oh,
The reason I bring this up is because probably 30 episodes ago we were just having a discussion and kind of like accidentally had an idea for a movie called Spider Tit.
Well, I don't want to steal your thunder here.
Okay.
I think that there still is a very viable market for Spider Tit out there.
Okay.
awesome.
So one aspect of the Lesbian Warrior Nun universe or the Nuniverse, is that if you've sort of been recruited by this evil presence to sort of help him go find the unborn Antichrist, you will, be sort of possessed. But at that point, every sort of bit of you can sort of become possessed as well. So if something were to be pulled off, bit off, yanked off, there's a good possibility that that would then also have a life of its own. So in the third act, there's a lot of parts that are doing different things, different body parts. So and nipples are definitely factored into into the equation.
Yeah, I can't wait to see this movie.
I know. Man, when Carrie, I think it's a competition between me and him to find, the most outrageous stuff to show each other. And he showed me, he's like, have you heard of this? And I'm like, no. And then I read the title of your movie. I'm like, I'm ashamed I've never heard of this. This sounds awesome. So yeah, we always do that back and forth. I'm like, hey, have you seen this? And he's like, no. So I can't wait either. It's right up my alley. I love the weird and bizarre, and that's just me.
Well, it's sort of like keeps getting crazy. Not like the story. Like the script has sort of remained in one revision for a while now. Like we got it sort of the way we wanted it to, but like the people that we sort of keep getting associated with it is pretty insane. Even like fight choreography and stuff. Like we got a guy who like worked on The Matrix, which is like ridiculous for a Lesbian Warrior Nun movie. So, it feels like, and this is sort of what makes me giddy, is that we've still got a small film here. It's a small independent film that we've had a lot of people really, really attach themselves to. Like they just have enjoyed it, and they've sort of enjoyed the spirit of it, and enough that we've been really, really blessed with the talent that has decided that this is something that they want to put their name on. Because that was a bit of a gamble when we thought we were going to do something with it, because it's like we had ideas that were very not this idea. It's like we had ideas, like a tour de force swan song that was going to be like my main, it was like an emotionally charged horror film was this movie that I was, working on at the time. Like it was going to be the thing. And it was like, and I got like totally uppity about it. I'm like, I'm going to drop weight and I'm going to work it. And it's like, I'm going to be the lead. I'm going to drop 30 pounds. It'd be a total fucking transformation. I'm going to become the next it guy. It's like you get those weird thoughts at 3:00 in the morning when you're eating a steakum and you realize that this is your life. And it's like every night becomes like New Year's Eve and you're like, no, I'm also going to quit doing all this stuff. Yeah. And it's like, after this cheeseburger, I'm going to quit altogether.
Yeah, I feel like if more people start coming onto it, by the end, it's going to be Disney presents The True Tale.
Wouldn't that be so weird?
Oh my God.
Although in my mind, there's a musical here.
Yeah.
Like there is like a musical here, Chastity. I don't know exactly what that would be, but there's a musical in there somewhere. And that would be, that would be so, what alternate universe would the Lesbian Warrior Nuns become a Disney movie? But like the more people that we end up, like shooting this thing by, they're like, yeah, I think I'm gonna be a Lesbian Warrior Nun movie. And it's like there's a part of me, it's like I really have to try like not just to burst out laughing, like, how is this happening? Like people looking at this thing and just being like, and they're reading it. They've got to be reading it. Like they can't just like skim it and be like, this is a great fight scene. This is pretty cool. Oh, this is a great piece of dialogue. Like at some point they're like, they've got to highlight like the word spider nipple. Like I had to have jumped off the, metaphorically, like jumped off the page at them, and they were like, now this is an interesting development. And yet they're like, turn the next page, which I didn't really expect that to happen, but they're, people are taken with Lesbian Warrior Nun movie.
So now the Indiegogo campaign, as of recording this episode, it's already launched, right?
Right. Yeah. So we're getting funding from a variety of different resources. But this is one where, and we screwed up. So this is what's great too, is that we were looking to get $25,000 and we put 250 and it stayed. So what would be great is if we did get that 250. However, we were not looking for that. So people were like, what the hell are you going to do with this Lesbian Warrior Nun movie? It's like, no. In the theme of all things, we screwed this up too.
Yeah, there you
So, yeah, it's like there's our poker face. No, we screwed this up too. So yeah, but yeah. So we are trying to raise funds on Indiegogo, as well as some other investment stuff that we've got going on. But yeah, so the Indiegogo is currently live, and we had a bunch of associate producer credits that we sold out of, and we had some other things that we sold out of, and some stuff that's like we're just putting on there, like we've got, and I didn't even bring it here. Oh, that's too bad. I'm gonna yell for my wife.
Okay, go ahead.
That we wanted to do was we wanted to treat the Beaver Dam like it was a real place. So half the merchandise for the movie doesn't even have the movie logo on it. It's got the logos from the Mythical Strip Club, which again was something like we thought about, and we're like, the name of the movie is nowhere on any of this stuff. And we're like, it doesn't matter. It's a beaver with his dick stuck in a log. It's genius. So we have, this is when I become like totally like the used car salesman, but like we have the Beaver Dam, like cup,
Very cool.
thermos kind of thing here. We have coasters all featuring the Beaver Dam logo. We have shirts. We have condoms. We have, we also have the actual, we have a nipple gun.
Yeah,
That
I've
is one
seen
of the
that on here.
perks.
And then you have some syrup.
Yes, that's a big part of the film, because it's like we can't be any more stereotypical Canadian. Like how I could not get extradited for this, but so part of the film is that like the only industry around the Beaver Dam is a maple syrup processing plant. Like that's their sole source of their patrons, is the people who get off work at the maple syrup processing plant. And one of the people at the Beaver Dam is actually trying to run a black market syrup smuggling ring. Like they think that's going to be how they're going to break out. Black market maple syrup.
Oh yeah, another thing that that's on here was the 5-pack of holy water lube.
Yes. Yeah, also included in our date night package.
Yeah.
We have,
Yeah, I've seen those also.
yeah, we have our 3 date night packages. Again, like we didn't really have anybody tapping our shoulders going, like we didn't have that voice of reason where people were shaking their head going, why are you? It's like instead people were like way too excited and energetic about the stupid shit we were saying. And like in hindsight, it would have been nice to have had like the other side of the coin there being like, the t-shirts are a good idea. But instead people were like, lube. Yeah, lube the whole goddamn thing up.
We need
Giant
lube, we need
dildos.
condoms,
Yeah.
we need syrup.
Right, suddenly it's like I didn't even know we were talking about the movie anymore, and I was like, I'm pretty sure half of this is illegal, but I didn't do it anyways.
But how great is that? And that's what I like about the independent movies. You don't have someone trying to control that. I mean, you can put what you want out there, and what you thought of gets to be put out there. You don't have anybody, Suits telling you no, you can't do this and that. Like this movie couldn't have existed anywhere else. You know, it has to be independent, but that's where I love going to that, because that's the only original shit anymore. We get the same processed crap every time. Like, oh, here's this movie. Well, I've seen that movie. You know, for instance, the new Bloodshot movie with Vin Diesel. I saw that movie. It was called Upgrade. Nobody talked about Upgrade. Upgrade's badass. I mean,
yeah.
But, you know, it's the same thing, but different, if that makes any sense.
No, it is. I mean, they know their beats. Like they know that this is what a particular audience with this demographic is expecting, and you know, then they sort of go through those beats to meet that, you know, whatever they have on paper, you know, whatever that thing is on paper that they have, or it's like, here's how we make our opening weekend, and then here's how we trail off the next, and here's how then we tie it into this next movie, and here's you know, it's this, they're very, very like thoughtful. Like, you know, like everything is really about like the marketing engine, like how do we market all this, and then the movie sort of just falls into the marketing plan more so than the marketing plan sort of falls around the movie. It's like they've got this marketing plan, and then sort of they have to figure out how to work the movie, and everything the movie does sort of into the marketing plan. And you know, with like indie films, most of the time we're just sitting there, you know, looking at each other going like, are you gonna pay for the Facebook boost for this post? Because I got pizzas.
Yeah.
You sort of have to deal, like there's a little more wheeling and dealing and stuff, and like the marketing is like it's the necessary evil thing. Like when you're making small movies, like you got to look at it as, well, we gotta, you know, it's like we got to get eyes on it, you know, where I think with the bigger people, it's like that marketing happens, you know, well before, first of all, they've shot a single frame. It happens well before it's even really been greenlit. You know, it's like all this marketing is in place, and there's focus groups, and you know, there's a lot of business majors making art decisions, which is always a weird thing.
Yeah.
You know, and that happens way too often. So obviously we're not thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, it's getting kind of late, so I guess we're going to wrap this thing up. But I mean, thanks for coming on here, man. This was an awesome discussion.
Oh, I had a blast.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to have you back on closer to the release of the film. That way you can, you know, give us some updates on it. But before we get off here, you want to give your information out, give the address for the Indiegogo and where they can find you at.
Yeah. So luckily, like, we've been picked up by a lot of different sites and a lot of news outlets already. So actually, we just go on Google, and strangely enough, if you put in Lesbian Warrior Nuns Indiegogo, we're right there. I mean, apparently we don't have as much competition as we thought we were going to have. And it's like lesbianwarriornuns.eu. God damn it. No, like we just come up right at the top. So the Indiegogo will come up first thing. Just putting in like strangely, just Lesbian Warrior Nuns, and sort of like the news outlets will hit. My site is horror-fix.com. So usually if I do release a press release, I usually hit my site first, and just goes my bias, and then I'll, you know, release it to the other news outlets too. So that's easy. Warrior Nut, like at Warrior Nuns of the Great White North, is the Facebook page, so that's there. And then usually I'll release stuff on Twitter under HorrorFix. So we've got both a page and a group for the film, and they're real easy to find on Facebook. And then, you know, you can always find me, Ash Hamilton. Like I'll talk to anybody. So if anybody just is like, hey, you got those Lesbian Warrior Nuns, I'll be like, yeah, dude. And then about a 5-minute mark, they're like, I don't know what the fuck this guy's talking about. And then you'll just see them trail off. So, but I'll get them to the 5-minute mark, so I'll talk to anybody. But yeah, we've got a lot out there. We've got a lot, like that part of the part of the conversation that people will be like, where's that missing part of the conversation that he keeps referring to? Because he's being awfully self-referential for something that they cut from the audio. Like that should hopefully drop like within the next week too. Like we're just sort of strategizing that. But yeah, like if you just put in Lesbian Warrior Nuns, or even like True Tale of Ole Splitfoot, because like I said at the beginning, people try to truncate it it's like you've got two camps. People are like, oh, the Ole Splitfoot movie. I'm like, yeah. And then they'll also be like, oh, the Lesbian Warrior movie. I'm like, yeah, it's the same movie. But, yeah, it's just like you took that part and the other guy took that part, and we're trying to put both parts together. But like you'll find it either under like True Tale of Ole Splitfoot or under Lesbian Warrior Nuns, depending on like how many characters were allowed.
Right.
It was like what part of the movie. So some people are like, man, it's gonna be like a monster movie, Splitfoot. People are gonna be like, that's like chicks with guns and shit. And so it's like we've created, unfortunately, two movies.
Right.
Long title.
You should sell two different shirts.
We totally should. Well, luckily we do have the actual, like the movie shirt, which is like the actual movie poster with the title on it. And that, by the way, is Katie Schooley. I got to shout out to her because like Katie's great and she's done a lot of the modeling for this. So a lot of the images that you see in the posters, like the t-shirts and stuff is Katie, who does have a role in the film, who plays Trixie in the film.
I think that's the t-shirt I saw, and I think I saw the Beaver Dam t-shirt on Facebook.
Yeah. So we've got like the Beaver Dam stuff. We got a ton of the Beaver Dam stuff, both black and white and colored, because why not?
Right.
So if you're looking at that little beaver fucking a log and you're thinking, you know what? If I had this in color, it'd be a sealed deal. Then that is also available through, like, we've got them on Redbubble and everything else. We just got like tons and tons of them. We've got like the Ragland jerseys. So now they're really becoming a salesman, but like we've got all those shirts, and it's real easy to find, like just Lesbian Warrior Nuns, and we're pretty much, as of about a week ago when people really started to like pick the story up. Like I Googled it today, because I'm like, how important am I? So I went ahead and put the name in there, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of Spanish language people who are really interested in this movie. So I learned how just poor Google Translate was today. And I'm like, there is nothing about bananas in this movie, at least not that I remember. But Google seems to think that it is banana laden of the Google Translate speak that I'm getting. So, yeah, I would suggest keeping with the English language unless you have a necessity to visit the Spanish language sites that have picked the story up. But
no,
it's there. So it's places.
All right. Yeah, like I said, I'm excited for this movie. Do you know when you're going to try to release it? What's your expected date?
Well, COVID notwithstanding, we were shooting the first two weeks of November. Okay. So, and it's a pretty aggressive shoot. We're looking at about 14 to 16 days, and luckily, we've got a pretty tight schedule that we can fit to. Like I said, COVID notwithstanding. So we think that hopefully, because we've also got distribution, like we don't have to shop around, which is great. So that sometimes is what takes a long time. And we're luckily able to sort of bypass that step. So hopefully by I would like to say maybe end of second quarter 2021. So just pretty aggressive, but that's when I'd like to have it out. Yeah. We got to get people thinking about, the sequel.
Yeah. You mean trilogy? You got to do a trilogy nowadays.
We've already written so we've already started looking at where these adventures would go, because we get together, my writing partner and I get together, and we're honestly junior high kids, we get together what if this were to happen, and then we just start thinking about outlandish shit, and all of a sudden we were like, okay, picture this. All right, picture this. Opening Lesbian Warrior Nuns 2, dildo factory. We go right into the dildo factory. And it's sad, when your writing partner's eyes light up and you're like, oh yeah. So we've got our expositional opening shot for a sequel. Yep. Hi, Mom.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Yeah, like I said, thanks for coming on here to our little show and talking with us. This was
anytime.
Had a blast.
Yep, I had a lot of fun. I really did. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, no problem, man. And
Yes,
like
sir.
I said, look forward to having you back, and we'll be sharing this on our Facebook group and page, and I'm gonna have to chip in and get the DVD, but yeah, definitely.
Well, and send it to me too. I'll whore it as much as absolutely possible. So.
Oh, okay, we'll do that.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks so much, guys.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Coming to get you, Barbara.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life